I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live. I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live. I'm a young black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's special conversation as we give context, reflection, and action to recent events involving injustices affecting the national Black community. My name is Afeni Grace. I am the program coordinator for the Harvey B. Gantt Center, and we thank you all for tuning in. Before we get started, please be sure to click that subscribe button below the screen to be updated on all future Gantt Center programs. Also, be sure to visit ganttcenter.org for updates on all things Gantt Center related. The YouTube chat is open and available for any questions or comments that you have throughout the evening. We will try our best to address audience questions, but we may not have time depending on the direction of the conversation. Finally, I'm proud to introduce tonight's moderator, Q City Metro's founder and publisher, Glenn Perkins. Welcome back, Glenn.
Thank you, Afeni.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Discussion.
The abolitionist Frederick Douglass once said that where there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation, he said, are men who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Douglas went on to say that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never did, and it never will, he said. Today in cities all across America, we are witnessing people demanding change. For far too long, we have lived in a nation born under the misguided notion of white supremacy. We have been shackled by economic and social systems that were never designed to yield equality, nor to respect the humanity of every American citizen. So today we're joined by an incredible panel to talk about recent events, but events that are not so recent, as we dig deep into a problem that is deeply rooted in American history. But more than that, we also hope to shed light on where we are heading as a nation and what we can do as individuals to help bring about a better tomorrow. Joining us today is Congresswoman Adams, who represents North Carolina's 12th Congressional District here in Charlotte. Welcome, Congresswoman Adams.
Thank you.
We have Mecklenburg Sheriff Gary McFadden. Welcome, Sheriff.
Thank you.
We have image activist Alvin C. Jacobs Jr., who uses his talents as a photographer to document issues relating to social justice. Welcome, Alvin.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Bakari Sellers, a former South Carolina state representative and current CNN political commentator. Welcome, Bakari.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for joining us today. I want to start with Congresswoman Adams. Congresswoman Adams, as the respected elder on the panel today, you've seen a lot of American history. How does what you're seeing now compare with some of the other movements you've seen throughout your career and throughout your life?
Well, first of all, let me thank the Gantt Center and thank you all for having me. It's a real pleasure to be among not only friends, but scholars and individuals who I absolutely respect. I am proud to be an elder, let me say, and I have, the Lord has spared me for more than 70 years, 74 to be exact. And so I've seen a lot in my lifetime. My mom did domestic work, but she always made sure that I knew what was going on around me. One of the things that has really impressed me about all that's going on today, and I want to certainly give respect to the Floyd family and certainly to honor them and the life of this young man. But I will tell you that everything that I've seen in my lifetime, where we have been able to, where a difference has been made, where change has happened, it's been the young people who've initiated that. We can go back to the 30s, and you might know that I spent 40 years on the campus of Bennett College, but even prior to getting there, growing up in Newark, New Jersey, having been born in North Carolina, and even traveling to the South, having to go to the back door to get food because we could not go in. But those were things that I saw during my life. I didn't see hangings, but I certainly read about them, and I knew that we were always in danger. But I see today that the movements that are taking place from the time that we looked at the civil rights movement, they have all been young people who have actually sparked that. From the sit-ins in Greensboro, where I spent the last 45 or so years of my life, it's been the young people who made that difference. And I'm just delighted to see that it's the young people again who are marching. They're peacefully marching, those who are marching for the right things. And I believe that there is going to be a silver lining and that we're going to see change. You know, someone said the seed that you plant today, you don't eat that fruit today. But they're planting some seeds, and we've tried to plant some. And I just think that, as we look today and we look back at what has happened, policing has, the history of it has, we can go back to slavery, really. and think about why there was policing and you had the massa looking for people. It was a system that was created to track and capture and return runaway slaves. And so I think some of that attitude is still pervasive today, and we have an opportunity to make change.
Congresswoman, you issued a statement today. You put out a statement calling on the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, as well as police departments nationwide, to permanently abolish or end the use of tear gas. Talk to us a little about that.
Well, first of all, we are a civilized nation. Tear gas should be used when it is absolutely necessary. And I certainly don't believe that that was the last resort that they had to use that. On peaceful protesters, these are chemicals that are harmful. These are chemicals that, in my opinion, don't need to be on streets of America. These are wartime things, and we're not in a wartime. And so I just think that we're civilized. We're not a third world country, and we don't need to be acting like that. And I think that, again, these things are dangerous, and we've got to, in many instances, as I look at what's going on with police, we've got to demilitarize. That's a military tactic that we don't need to see on not only the streets of Charlotte, but streets in America. And so, yes, I hope that we're going to be able to just ban it and not use it. I don't think it's certainly necessary, and it certainly wasn't necessary in this particular situation. So, it brings, there are all kinds of chemicals that they were using. But yeah, I think we need to ban it. I think we need to ban it right now.
Sheriff McFadden, as a Black law enforcement officer, a career law enforcement officer, in fact, you're very familiar with both sides of these issues. How do you explain the apparent hostilities that exist today between police departments in America and Black communities?
Well, the hostility comes from, and again, thank you all for inviting me, and I hope that we can continue these conversations where we can bring clarity. When we say that we have these conversations, we haven't had a lot of conversations. We are left out of the conversations. I see my fellow law enforcement kneeling now, and I have been kneeling for years. I see the fellow law enforcement shaking hands. But I think what happens is the relationship is broken down because it's seasonal. About 4 or 5 weeks from now, everything is going to be back to normal. We're going to be back segregated, and we're going to still have these task force, these forums, and everything else to formulate things to make us believe that we are moving forward. But the right people have never been invited into the room and to the table. The same people talking for our people, and I would say our people, and the same people talking for law enforcement is the same people. We have to get away from that. Grassroots organizations and the people in the streets are the people that we need to connect with. And I'm sure we can talk about that, because when it happened in 2016, I stood in front of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and had a 2-hour argument with about 6 brothers. Well, after that, those 6 brothers formulate what we call Heal Charlotte and Greg Jackson and those. So we understood each other. We didn't know where we were coming from at that moment, but to heal these things that we need to do, we need to have more people invited who are on the streets now. The task force are great. The forums are great. The people who are going to whisper in our ears in our community are great. People know who our whisperers are. They send the people to us to whisper. And I'm not talking about law enforcement. I'm talking about my people in the community. They send these people to whisper in our ears, and we believe we have arrived to a more accountable explanation to what happened, but we're not. If we did, we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in now. So simply listening to the community and doing all the nice things and the seasonal things now, we need to build true relationships, but not with the leadership that we have in place now.
I want to get you to comment very briefly, if I can, on what we talked about with Congresswoman Adams. She would like to see the use of tear gas banned by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, as well as police departments nationwide. You were once an officer with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and a homicide detective. Is that practical? Is that doable?
If we put our work to it. Like Congresswoman Adams said, it should be the last resort. But have we put in the work not to do this? I don't like it, never did, because it reminds me of the 60s and reminds me of that. And so then if we can do all of our work to until this be the last resort, then we shouldn't have it. But you know, I'm not going to speak, and let me make sure we're clear. I'm never going to speak against my comrades across the street. I work with them, I've been with them, and I can't judge what they're going to do. Like they can, I would suggest that they judge not what I'm doing. So I don't know what they saw. I don't know what they believed that was necessary. But for me, tear gas would be my last resort, and I don't like it.
Bakari, Sheriff McFadden just described what we're seeing as seasonal and suggested that in 4 or 5 weeks, we'll be back where we were. To me, this seems different in some ways. I'm not sure why. It seems that for the first time in perhaps a long time, we actually have the attention of the nation. How do you see this? Do you think this is just seasonal?
Well, first, let me just say I'm from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad always taught me the 2 most important words in the English language were the words thank you. And so I have to start by saying thank you to the Gantt Center. Thank you to Sheriff McFadden. I don't think that he gets the appreciation he deserves. And so from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you. And to Congresswoman Adams, I think that she belongs in the same sentence with people like Fannie Lou and Ella, those people who fought to make sure that you could have a Bakari Sellers who sit before you today. So thank you. So I actually agree with the sheriff. And I don't want people to find our comments to be absent of hope or that our faithfulness has been shaken. But the reason that I agree with him is because we've been here before. Most white folk, when they evaluate race, they do so through the lens of their lifetime. If you're 40 years old, you evaluate it through your 40 years. But for Black folk in this country, we evaluate race and where we are through the context of our history. So for me, I immediately think back to 1955 and Emmett Till. I think to Jimmy Lee Jackson. I think to Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. I think to when my father was shot in Orangeburg, and you had Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton who were killed. You fast forward, I'm thinking about Trayvon, Tamir, all those names that we ran down. I mean, we ran down so many names that we had to restart the song 4 times. That's how many names we ran down. And so what happens in our communities is this, and I think the sheriff is right in stating the facts, that what happens is we have a shooting, we have a video, we have pain, we have outrage, we have memorial, we have grief, and then the cycle continues. And nothing about that system changes. And so what are we going to do now, I think, is the better question. How do we address and formulate specific changes to the system and what we know is institutionalized racism? I want everybody to be extremely clear why we're here. I think we have to frame it. Stokely Carmichael, who I refer to affectionately as Uncle Stokely, he defines racism as this. He says that if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. If you have the power to lynch me, that's my problem. See, racism is a power construct. It's about systems of injustice. And until we understand that, see, this is not just about George Floyd. This is not just about Breonna Taylor. This is not just about Ahmaud Arbery. This is about a system that perpetually puts Black people into a perpetual sense of grief. And so the sheriff actually posed the correct question for the night. Like, how do we change what we know to be true? How do we alter our destiny? And we have a lot of faith. We always have faith. But the question is, what does the work look like? Because faith without works, as we all know, is dead. And so in order to break the cycle that we know to be true in our communities, because we were just here, we can go back to 1992. Well, I was 8. So I don't want to say I was just there. I don't know what was going on, but you had Rodney King. You fast forward, you had Trayvon Martin, you've had Tamir Rice. Then we had Ferguson in 2014. We've had these collective moments where you think the consciousness of our country is paying attention. But now we have Taylor Swift, we have Carson Wentz, even Trevor Lawrence. I hate Clemson. I'm a big Carolina fan, so it pains me to say that. But you do have people who you would never think who are coming out talking about what justice actually means. But again, the sheriff is right. And so the question that we have to have tonight, and I know you'll get there, but the question we have to have tonight is, what does the work look like? Do not, and this is where I'll wrap up, do not tell people to leave the streets. I've said this in front of the world. I'll say it here because this moment demands it. Do not tell our people to leave the streets. Do not say you want peace if you also will not say you want justice. And the question is, what does that justice look like? And once we can define what that justice looks like, then in the words of, the old gospel song, we got to order our steps. See, that's what has to happen. We have to order our steps and put the work in so we can actually get to attain the justice after we realize what it looks like.
We absolutely want to get back to that. I want to bring Alvin into the conversation. Alvin, when protests started following the death of Mr. Floyd, you grabbed your camera equipment and headed there. What did you find in Minneapolis?
I can only rewind my social justice clock back about 10 years. That's when I was introduced to the work. When I arrived in Minneapolis, the city was on fire, literally and figuratively. I've been kind of indoctrinated, throughout this. I know what protest looks like. I know what it feels like. I know what it sounds like. But I've never seen such widespread frustration. I've never seen so many white people, in my life standing arm in arm and doing everything we were doing with the same amount of agony. So I saw buildings, but I saw people. And I felt energy that I've been accustomed to, but it was just overwhelming. So this building was on fire, right? People were doing what they were doing. This building over here was on fire. People were doing what they were doing. But listening to the chants and looking at the demographic of folk just changed my entire trajectory of what I thought I knew about social justice protests, especially if we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's usually just us, might as well have been FUBU, for us, by us, because it was just us. We used to be in this fight by ourselves. We would say, white people, please fight with us. Please, we need you. We need your solidarity, right? We can't do this by ourselves. And Sheriff, he makes all the sense in the world when he's like, look, guys, like you have to be at the table. Absolutely. We're not at the table. If it wasn't for our Congresswoman, I wouldn't be here. You understand what I'm saying? If it wasn't for you, Glenn, I wouldn't be here. So it looked different because those people I wasn't used to seeing. I'm used to the violence. Yeah, okay. Standing Rock was violent, right? Ferguson was popping off, but there wasn't any white people.
Why do you think we're seeing more white residents standing with us this time?
I think this particular instance, and this is just my opinion, I think the overall timing and the brutality of this murder. A lot of people can be like, okay, well, a shot is split second. A lot of people, can look at that as a mistake. This was a methodical murder. I don't even know if those two words go together, but this thing was well thought out. And it was more than one individual involved. This was painstaking minute after minute after minute after minute after minute. And there were multiple opportunities for it to cease, and it didn't cease. So again, split second, a lot of people say what they will do and what they won't do. I know for a fact, right? I know for a fact our sheriff will not kneel on a man or a woman's neck with all of his weight for 9 minutes. I know that for a fact, right? So a lot of us can say that, what we won't do. This instance right now, man, it woke the world up. People are paying attention and they're feeling our pain right now. There are white folk marching with us that never really felt, an officer's baton, like Sheriff said in the 60s, right? White people are feeling this, just being in the mix with us. And they're like, wait a minute, why are they gassing? Why are they shooting pepper balls? Because that's how they get out. That's how they get out. And they're like, whoa, wait. There's no way would a police officer just pull you over and snatch you out of the car. Oh yeah? There's no way, huh? They wouldn't do that. Well, if you weren't doing nothing wrong, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. Really? Is that really what we're talking about right now? So now you got Karen getting pepper sprayed, right? Which is, sometimes that's what it takes. But I'm seeing that for the first time in my life. White people, at the very least, for that instant, for those few seconds, for those few minutes, feeling what we've been feeling for a very long time.
Congresswoman Adams, Bakari talked about the hard work that has to be done after the protest, after the demonstrations. What is the mood in Congress right now, and especially with the Congressional Black Caucus?
Well, let me first of all say that I appreciate the words of the young man. and white folk getting involved, because I tell you, there are a lot of George Floyd's out there, a lot of them, and a lot of people I think are beginning to realize that, you know, that could be my neck. And so, but when you see something, it's one thing to hear about it. It's one thing to read about it. It's another thing, you know, I'm an artist, to even see it in a painting. But when you actually see it, you know, so I said, you know, just thank God for all the new technology, for all the cell phones with cameras and those kinds of things. So it's a visual for America to see, and they've seen it. And so this is one of the reasons I think that we've been able to bring a lot of people along. We have to make sure that we hold the police accountable. And so we've got to look at policing, I think, in a different way in our community now. We've got to ask ourselves as a society, those of us who have, and I'll say to my white brothers and sisters, that you have all of the rights and privileges, and you have to understand and have some sense of why are other people who don't look like me denied the opportunities that I have. Now, what we do today is, and what these young people are doing, and everybody else who's working, it's going to have, I think, a tremendous impact on us tomorrow and so forth. But the Congressional Black Caucus has been, we've been meeting all throughout the pandemic, because, you know, we had that to address, which we still have. It's still before us. That's one thing that makes me a little bit nervous too, about all the crowds and so many people who are unmasked. But I think we have to, first of all, have a national database that will address these citations that officers get. We've got to have more transparency. The Black Caucus is putting together a full package of things that many of our members are putting together bills that they have. But we got to have a national database, I think, first of all, that addresses and takes a really good look at the misconduct. Data is something that you need when you're trying to write policy and when you're trying to get support for it, because people will say, well, that's just talk. That's just you saying it. So it's just like when we were looking at people who were being stopped, who were profiled, and many cities, and many of the cities that I've worked in, we looked at that. But I think this whole militarizing that these police have now, this attitude, that's got to be stopped as well. So that's going to be a part of that. We have several members who have bills that will address that. We got to ban these chokeholds. If that was not permissible for police officers, this man would still be alive today. And so would many others who probably fell to the chokeholds. But I think also one of the things that we're working on as a caucus is updating the civil rights laws, strengthening racial profiling laws. That's gotta happen. But on the side of local and state government, because we know that as a Congress, we can do some things, but many of these things have to be transacted at the local level. So we've got to make sure that we give the authority to our local governments. There should be something in the law which says you can't stand by and watch a murder, even if you have on that blue suit or black suit, whatever color it is. And that is, so this is why we saw today the other 3 officers are being charged as well. So I think we've got to work, and we've got to work now. We don't have to delay. I heard some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say today, well, we can't do that right now. We can get started right now. And I can tell you that the Congressional Black Caucus has already begun this process.
Congresswoman, I know that you, as well as Bakari, will have to, at a later time, leave this conversation early because you have other commitments. And we also want to get to our survey, our viewer survey. But right before we do that, very quickly, if you would, even if the caucus is able to get such a package through the Republican-controlled Senate, it probably has 0 chances of getting past the Oval Office. So these pieces of legislation you're talking about, are they just a pipe dream or a wish list?
Well, I think you have to begin with your list and your pipes or whatever it is. But there must be a beginning. And I continue to say that you don't change policy till you change policy makers. And yes, the last buck will stop at the White House, but we can make America great again by making the White House great again. And we can get these bills and this package, we can put it together and then move it through the process. But we also, it's not just getting it through the Senate. We got to make sure that the House agrees as well. We have a very diverse House. I don't think anybody in the House of Representatives, my colleagues who don't look like me, would not be supportive. Some of them might have some issues with some of the things that we may be talking about. But I think, as has already been said, the conscience of America has been stoked, and attention is now being paid to things that people never thought about. As a Black mama and Black grandmother, I have a daughter and a son, and I have 4 Black grandchildren. I worry about them every day. And I want to make sure that the life that they have, that they will grow up and be able to have the same privileges and opportunities that everyone else has. And so, I'm going to continue to work for them. But we've got to make sure that, the conversations that I have with my grandchildren and my children are not the same conversations that a white parent would have. They don't have to worry about their children really being safe. We do. We all want the same kinds of things in terms of getting a good education and having life a little better than we did. They don't have to worry about that. Those are not the conversations that they will have with their children as they leave home every day. So I'm hopeful, and I believe that change will come and that the Congress can begin this process. The CBC is 55 members strong. We are the largest caucus in the Congress.
Yes, I was corrected. We don't have a viewer survey today, but we do have lots of reader questions or viewer questions. If you have questions for someone on our panel, please type them into the comment field. One question we have for Sheriff McFadden, a person in the audience wants to know what's being done to better screen law enforcement officers.
Well, we go through the necessary process, and I've been asked that question 100 times. We go through a process of screening people. We go through the psychological part of screening people. We look in their background of screening people, but we cannot screen somebody's heart. We cannot screen the heart of somebody who has hate in their heart. It's absolutely, we can't screen that. And so we do screen the best that we can. But what I would love to happen is, if you don't like what you see, why don't you come on in and help me change it? And that's what I want to see. If you don't see it out there, come inside and help me change it so we can screen all these people that you believe that are going to cause a problem in our community. But then why don't you come in and let's push those people out? And they said, well, we don't want to be a cop. But then you don't really want to take care of the problem. I could well sit at home after my retirement from across the street with my TV show and my consulting company, which is only it's me and my family. But no, somebody challenged me because I challenged them, and that's what we have to do. So we can screen everybody, but can we screen hate and racism? There's no box that says, do you have hate and racism or the percentage of hate or racism in your heart? Now, what we can do is after they get here, if we see that, then we can take care of it. But 99% of the time, we can't see that hate in their heart because they hide it like anything else. People we work with, until this happens, you probably heard some conversation in your office that you never heard before. And you looked around and like, well, I don't know why they do that. Because this is the time to hear those conversations. But to get rid of that person, that's what we're going to start doing. If you look at this gentleman's record, the first officer has been arrested. He had 18 use of force. And he was involved in 4 other deaths. Where's the community then? Why don't we stand on the steps then instead of letting this person still go down the road to where we got to today? Because we get lax, We go back into our hole and we get comfortable. And then they send that whisperer back in our neighborhoods who look like us to talk to us and says, I got it. Let me handle it. They call me. They call me to the meeting and I'll tell you what they say. But I hate this. I had this conversation with some of my staff members today. Some people I had to let go because they have a hidden agenda. But then you also need to know the power of who's in office and your office. That's why you see me and my fellow 5 Black sheriffs struggling across in North Carolina, and you look across America and you can see why there are so many white sheriffs in office for 40 years, because we have allowed them to stay in office. If you look at the movie Just Mercy, the sheriff who caused all of that remained in office for years after that. Why have we got him out? We want justice when we want it. We want it now. You're gonna have to force their hand. Do you know justice when you see it? I don't know. Do I know somebody who's sitting there has a great application and want to come in and work for me? I can only tell you what I see on paper. I cannot look into his heart. But if I see his heart on my watch and I see his agenda, the sheriff of Mecklenburg County will step to them, and my staff know that. But we have to elect leaders that will take these stands in our community to prevent people like that coming into our agencies and coming into our organization. But then I put it back on the community.
Sheriff, can I
Will
interrupt
you chastise your leaders for doing things like that?
I just want to interrupt you for a minute. We definitely want to come back to that. As I said earlier, Bakari has a previous commitment, and I want to get back to him before he has to leave. Bakari, you talked about the hard work that has to be done after the demonstrations, after the protests. What does that look like to you? How do we move beyond merely marching and protesting to accomplish some of those things that we all know need to be accomplished?
So we've had a roadmap before. I mean, I wasn't around, but we've seen that when blood has been shed, that is usually the only way that we actually advance equality in this country. And let me be very clear. When Black blood is shed, usually that is the only time that we advance equality in this country. The Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act came from Black blood in the streets. The Fair Housing Act wasn't going to get passed until they killed King April 4th of '68. And LBJ said, well, we got to do something because they burning the country down. We didn't take the Confederate flag down in South Carolina until Clem died and 8 others after they let that straggly white boy in their church and he murdered them on a Wednesday night in Bible study. So we now have a moment, right? We have to conquer that moment, but we also have to know what to ask for. And Congresswoman Adams actually began to lay out. I mean, she talked about some of the things they're doing. Not only do I want the officers arrested, charged, and convicted. You notice I didn't stop at arrested because I don't think arrests are justice. So save me that applause, because for me, arrest ain't justice. I've seen it too much in my lifetime. I'm only 35 years old. I mean, hell, the officers who shot my dad and shot 3 others, they were all charged, they were all tried, and they were all found not guilty. So let's not go down what the arrest means. But I want all the officers arrested, charged, and convicted, not just in George Floyd, but Breonna Taylor. Let's remember her name in this case. I actually want, as Congresswoman Adams said, we need to have a database where we can have misconduct of officers, because right now you can get fired from the sheriff's department, and you can go down to South Carolina and get hired just like that, maybe even be chief of police in a small town. We need to nationalize and standardize use of force guidelines and training. We need to make sure that we limit qualified immunity in civil cases, in 1983 cases. We need to lower, and this is my beef with the Obama administration, but we need to lower the standard by which we can bring federal criminal civil rights charges against law enforcement. The reason that the Eric Gardner murderer was not able to be charged federally is because the standard is too high. And the last thing I want to tell you that we need to do, and this is not sensationalized, this is very true. Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, they paid for the police departments that killed them. Because right now the United States Department of Justice gives grants to law enforcement departments all across this country. And those grants don't come with any civilian oversight. Those grants don't come with any transparency. those grants don't come with any accountability. And so, no, I'm not saying defund the police, because that's impractical in my opinion. I used to be a lawmaker. I'm sitting here with y'all because I got beat, but still I used to be, right? But my point to you is this, that we have to have accountability. We have to have transparency with the dollars that flow from the Department of Justice, because Breonna and George paid for their own murderers. So these are the things that we have to focus on. While people are protesting in the streets, I want you to protest until your heart is content. And like I said, I don't want any looting. I don't want any rioting. I don't want any cars to burn up. But I also want justice for my people. And I think justice looks like those systemic changes that Congressman Adams began to lay out, and I fleshed out a little bit more.
Once again, I know that you have to leave, but very quickly, in 30 seconds, I'm going to ask you and Congresswoman Adams the same question before we say goodbye to you. What gives you hope? What are you seeing that gives you hope that we might be moving in the right direction, if you believe we are moving in the right direction?
Well, I have to go back to being a mother and a grandmother. It's the young people today, they give me hope, because I know, and all you have to do is look at over the years, we've got more probably Black elected officials across this country. I was so amazed as I'm watching TV and the mayors are coming on and speaking. We were all doing pandemic, okay? And I said, well, my goodness, we've got all these, and they're young. They're young. But that gives me hope. I just believe that we've got a lot of work to do, but I think we've got these brilliant young folks who are not going to be moved. And I certainly appreciate the fact that they have that kind of courage and stamina. You know, we can put all of this, and of course, if we don't have a seat at the table, you know, Charlie Chisholm, bring in a folding chair, and they're going to do that. I mean, I don't support any violation of the law, but I think sometimes we have to stand up and continue to stand up and be heard, and they're doing that. And I just believe that that's going to help us to get to where we need to do. Now, it might be that we've got to, some of these police departments can't be fixed, and we might have to just revise the whole thing. I still think, you know, we've tried for years to have, I don't believe police can police themselves. And that's another problem. So, you know, looking at review boards and getting involved. But the other thing is, as these folks have been out here by the thousands marching, I hope that same that same attitude, that same energy that they will take to the polls in November. You don't change policy till you change policymakers. And I just believe that, you know, somebody's going to make a decision for and about us, most times without us. And I think they're beginning to get that. And I'm just hopeful that they are going to, that we're gonna get this vote turned out. We're gonna do what we need to do. And, you know, I have a little saying, I say, we're gonna turn this mother out. I believe that's gonna happen in November. We're gonna make the change that we need to see and that really we deserve to see. After all of these 400 years of slavery and hanging, we got some different kind of slavery going on today, but I believe we can abolish that too.
Thank you for joining us, Congresswoman. I know you have to leave. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bakari, do you have time to address that question?
Yeah, of course. I'll be brief. The Congresswoman alluded to that we've been in this country 401 years this year. And we were stripped of absolutely everything, but we kept our faith and we remained hopeful. Even in the darkest of times. And what gives me hope are my 3 children. I have a 15-year-old who, Sheriff, I need your cell number because she just got her permit. So I'm gonna have to call you. And I have 17-month-old twins. And as tired as I get, as emotional as I get, you know you have to continue for them. And I always harken back to the Bob Moseses, the Julian Bonds, the Kathleen Cleavers, the Marion Barrys. There's so many who did not give up on us, not even knowing we would be here. And we stand on their shoulders today. And so I'm very intentional and I'm very purposeful, knowing that we must continue. We have no choice. And everybody ain't gonna be a fighter. Everybody ain't gonna be a protest. But I think one of the things, if people don't remember anything else that I said today, not one person can be free until we all are free. So whether or not you want to do the work or not, we got to all make sure that even the least of us is free before we can all chant that we're free in this world. So with that, I say thank you. I'm going to sit idly by and wait on these protests to see what happens on CNN and maybe go on during the 7, but definitely during Anderson. So I hope people tune in.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
God bless you all.
Thank you. Alvin, throughout history, the creative class, if you will, has been instrumental in bringing about social change in America, whether it was writers like James Baldwin, or actors like Harry Belafonte, or singers and entertainers, Sammy Davis Jr. and others. What is the role of the creative class today, and how do you see them stepping up to meet that challenge?
Before I respond, I want to make sure that I say Breonna Taylor's name. That's important. We've lost so much, in the past few hours. I wanted to make sure that I said that out loud. But the role of the creative class is to control the narrative. Baldwin was a genius, right? His ability to put pen to paper and some of our deepest thoughts and hopes realized. The same way with Gordon Parks. We look at what we know about history, and it's either through the written word, it's either through images and photographs and video, or through oral history, and that's all art. This pandemic, if anything, has given weight to what creativity is. A lot of folks thought that maybe art was just finger painting, when you were 5 years old, and if you weren't necessarily good at it, it didn't matter anymore. Well, when you're sitting there and you're watching streaming services, that's art. You're reading a book, that's art. Culinary art, beautiful food and cooking, all these things are art. And it's our role to reflect, not just history, not just, what's going on. Anytime I'm asked, what my role is as a photographer in the social justice movement, I've always said that I'm holding up a very large and uncomfortable mirror to reflect what I see. I like what you asked, Bakari and Congresswoman Adams. What were they thankful for? I'm glad that I could, if I have a problem, I can reach the sheriff. Not because of who I am, right? Not because of who I am or what I do, in the city of Charlotte, but because he's accessible. I like that I could, get a hold of Bakari. I like that I could get a hold of Congresswoman Adams. But I have to do my job. My role as a community member and as a creative is to do what I'm supposed to do. I'm not a lawmaker. I don't enact policy, right? But I believe if the sheriff sees enough of some stuff he don't want to see, you understand what I'm saying? If he hears enough stuff that he doesn't want to hear, it's my job to bring it to the forefront. He doesn't do what I do. I don't do what he does, right? I don't do what Congresswoman Adams does. But if I do what I'm supposed to do, I can help them do their jobs and we can have a better world. So it's like you, for example, the written word is so powerful. And I'm probably gonna mess this quote up, but it was like, never argue, with somebody who buys ink by the barrel or something like that. We've got power. We've got power. Most of what we know about the social justice movement came from individuals stepping outside of their comfort zone. It came from writers, it came from actors, it came from even members of law enforcement who pushed back against their comrades. But my job as a creative is to tell the story. And I invite all of my fellow creatives, right? I don't care if you draw, I don't care if you paint, I don't care if you dance, get out there and bring back the information and spread it to the people. Don't just have one narrative. If we didn't have what happened last night, right, recorded by some folks in the media, right, that narrative would have been completely different. Sometimes it's going to be difficult. Sometimes it's going to be rough, but you got to get out there and bring back the current information or we're never going to have change. I can't create laws, right? I'm not in law enforcement, but as a creative, and I believe all of us, if we've been given this calling, are supposed to respectfully and with integrity and intention and creativity, bring the work of the people to the people.
I'm glad you mentioned Gordon Parks. He's one of my personal heroes. He was a genius of his era. A someone online has a question. How do you recommend that we broach a conversation with those who do not understand the Black Lives Matter movement or systemic racism? How do we start that conversation?
There was a guy I had a conversation with maybe 6 months ago, a year. He was like, Alvin, there's no way that things are as bad as you say they are. There's no way. I don't know what y'all Black people are talking about, because of even an inkling of the things that are happening to you, or the way that you say that you've been treated, if that would have happened to me, we're burning the country down. He said that to me, right? So things aren't as bad as we say they are because we haven't done anything about it. And I can't remember who said this quote, but it was like, you guys, America should be glad that we haven't began to push back. But the conversation begins with humanity. Oftentimes in other countries, Congresswoman Adams mentioned, this isn't a third world country. And, a little pushback on that. Third world country, they're still humans. And during slavery, we were, decided to be 3/5 of human beings. They attempted to remove our humanity. So if you can hold that part up, and you can see a human being, that's something that changes the mindset of a lot of people. If you can look at someone and remove their humanity from them, they don't have the right to do that, right? Nobody can take that from you. But the conversation begins with, we're all people. And I don't mean all lives matter. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all, because again, all lives matter when Black lives matter, right? That's a part of the quote. But we have to start having conversations between our neighbors. If you look at some of the apps, right, whether it be Nextdoor, whether it be Ring or anything like that, you look at some of the comments, and there are people in our communities, in our neighborhoods, right, who are talking about people who they don't know. We have to get to know each other. So we have a million panels, and I mean, every time I see the sheriff, he's like, boy, they will panel you to death in Charlotte. they will have a task force board till can't nobody breathe. But we have to get to know each other. We got to walk up and start talking to some folks, man, and get to have some better conversations, man, about the people who live in our communities. Most of the things that are happening are coming from strangers. If we get to know each other, man, no one's a stranger. So I think having some real live conversations, man, will change the climate in our community.
Sheriff, do you have any thoughts on that?
He's exactly right, and thank you all for the comments on it, but we don't know each other. And people think that we do. And that's the problem. We get to know each other, get to know the real person. Most people think I'm just a sheriff. I am. I've been fighting for civil rights all of my entire life since I've been 5 years old, out of South Carolina. Most people don't know that me and the NAACP went to Selma, Alabama in 2000 to remove Joe Smitherman. You don't even know who Joe Smitherman is. But then they had a slogan, Joe got to go. We put the first African-American first African-American mayor in Selma, Alabama in 2000. So imagine the Bloody Sunday that we talk about, the same mayor was in Selma, Alabama to 2000. If you get to know us, we can fight this. But that's what I'm saying. They send people to us now to whisper in our ears, and we believe them. Come and talk to your sheriff. Come and talk to me. If you're not into the streets, then you know where the street, you get it from the streets and you can bring it in. But how do we change that? And you asked about the conversation. Bring those people into a conversation with you without the forum, without the task force, without all the other stuff we're going to put together after this, and teach them and learn this.
Okay, I think
teach them and learn them this. And I think, Glenn, I stayed out of church 32 years in Charlotte. Wasn't an African-American church. It was a First Presbyterian church downtown in Charlotte. That is my home. When I was elected, that's where I gave my election speech. The people in that church helped me become the sheriff. Why? Because when I got there, they were like anybody else, they believe is over here and is over there. But when you bring it to them, and I was like, really? A young man asked me a question, hear me in the parking lot. Why didn't I go to the Citadel in 1977 to play football? And when I told him why, he was shocked. Why wouldn't you go to that school? Well, sir, if I would have went to Charleston, South Carolina to play football in 1977 at the Citadel, I would have made history twice. But when you bring it to the reality, then they get it. But you have to bring them in. I guarantee you this, people are on this call tonight who would never be on this call listening to this because of me and some other people have said, you need to chime in. You need to listen in. And I got these calls, and I was, you know, ecstatic and excited about it. But we have to bring them in these conversations to really sit them down. One young man one time called me, and he says his daughter is stranded in Atlanta, in the hood, but she comes from that side of the city. When I walked him through what I could do for him, because you know the people in the hood, he respected that. So you have to understand that all the people marching with us now, when I keep saying us, because I'm part of it, all the people marching and in the parks and everything, they believe they're getting it. But when you come out a little later, when the pepper ball comes out and the tear gas comes out and the people are, then the reality opens up. Well, I was just in the march. Well, you were in the protest. You was in the protest. The march starts later on at night. The demonstrations start later on at night. If you bring them into that and let them see what really happens, then their eyes will open up. But these, like my brother say, the forums, the task force, and all this stuff is not going to work. If it did, it would have worked by now. We have to be dead to the point and tell them what is going on, how we feel, and where we're going to go. We don't have a roadmap. When you say, well, you want justice and we want this, well, if you want policies and change, name a policy that you want change. Name what you really want to see. And then we can move on. To this next week, I have a policy that we've been reviewing for 2 days, and it's called duty to intervene. Because if you see it on the side of the car, like this young man was on the side of the car, you have 3 officers did not intervene. In my policy, you better intervene. And if you don't, you're gonna have another job and not work for me. But you got to hold us accountable. Like Congressman says, if you want to see change, you're going to have to change the policymakers. If you don't like what you see.
Sheriff, where is that proposed policy? We're almost out of time, and you just said something.
No, we're drafting it. We're drafting it. We're looking at it. And we're saying we're getting it together. So people say, why would you say that? Because I want you to know, when I hear it, like my brother said, when I hear it, I hear it. It's not that we are working on it. And we use the words like resources. What resource? We got resources. Name the resource. You challenge me. You challenge the, if you say we got resources, well, name the resources. If you got a policy, I'm telling you, a policy is coming from the sheriff, from this Mecklenburg County Sheriff Office. It's going to be duty to intervene. You can hold me accountable for that. That's not resources. That's the actual policy that I'm going to have. And you're going to have to tell people, show me. You say you want justice. When do you want it now? Well, here's justice. And that's what we're going to have to start doing.
Sheriff, we've had a number of questions that kind of focus on the whole issue of accountability. And since we're talking about that, I've often said that the hardest thing to do in the American court system is to convict a law enforcement officer of killing a Black man. And sometimes it seems that the hardest thing to do in law enforcement is to fire an abusive officer. Either they get their job back somehow, or they go to the next town over and they're employed there. How do we hold law enforcement accountable?
Allow us to teach you how to hold us accountable.
What does that mean?
Allow us, that means that, have we ever heard the word use of force continuum? No. That is something that we know in law enforcement that you will never ask us about. Use of force continuum. Do we use a baton? Do we use a nightstick? Do we do pepper spray? Do we use hard hands? Do we do strike and blows? We know all of that. You don't know all of that. So we mainly just sit back and say, if they don't ask us, we're not going to tell you. Because 99% of the time, when we have these 100 forums, like my brother said that we're going to have after here, we all know it. Bring in the talking heads, bring in the familiar faces. We sit there and you pepper us with questions. And 90% of the question is, this happened to my cousin, this happened to my brother, this happened to me and that. Allow us to talk to you. Reasonable doubt and probable cause. Why the sheriff is upset with why these four young men, these four officers were not arrested sooner, because we were talking about reasonable doubt. We're going to investigate this case so it won't be any reasonable doubt. I understand that, and I'm not going to dispute whatever these people were saying, but I'm looking for probable cause. Do we have probable cause to arrest them? But again, how to hold us accountable, allow us in law enforcement to show you, teach you, and have you to understand how to hold us accountable. Now, I know this is going to black out the machine and people are going to get offline. Your pastor can't tell you that. Your lawyer can help you with that. The person who's been down the road several times may also help you. But until we tell you how you could and how we can help you, we're gonna still be at that point. Because here's what happened also. Tell us the truth. Be truthful about your statements when you're giving it to us. If we don't do anything else after this night, let's me have a forum and let's dissect Ferguson. Let's dissect Ferguson. You have Darren Wilson in your hands on shooting Michael Brown. Not 10 people can tell you how far Darren Wilson was from Michael Brown when he fired the first shot. But we wanted Michael Brown to be in custody so bad that we fabricated some of the facts that didn't fit the physical evidence. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, the police lied. Well, they could have. I don't know. But we need to tell the truth so you can hold us accountable and know how to hold us accountable. That is how we're going to move forward in holding the police accountable.
Thank you, Sheriff. We're now past the hour, and we want to be respectful of the time of our audience. But I also want to leave the audience with some hope. So I'll ask you to briefly, very briefly, tell us what gives you hope in this time of turmoil in America.
Can you still see me?
I can.
Okay. What gives me hope? Yesterday
Very
gave
briefly.
me hope. Yesterday gave me hope. I saw about 14 of my family members gave me hope. On my wall here is all my ancestors. I don't have King. I don't have Obama. I am their hope. I'm that hope of those kids out in the street who see me and said, you're the first African-American sheriff, and I can hug him and I can kiss him and say, I love you. What gives me hope is brothers who uplift me because I'm going to uplift their children. What gives me hope is the people in the street marching tonight that say they will not give up. That gives me hope. It does my heart great to see my people marching in the street at night. Why? Because it gives me hope that they're going to send a message that I hope other people get. So I'm hoping that they get that message, and that's my hope.
Thank you, Sheriff. Alvin, what gives you hope?
So I'm in, well, I was in Minneapolis when I got the message, and I'm talking hope on 10. I had about 3 or 4 multimillionaires, send me a text asking how they could get involved. I mean, when you saw those Carolina Panthers roll up, right? Brothers got money, they don't have to be in the streets. They was like, brother, we got to show up. How do we show up? Which protest? Like, how do we do? So I guided them through the process and put them in touch with some for show right on organizers. That gives me hope, man, because we've had so much divide, right? Like once you get rich or once you you obtain a particular level of education, you kind of remove yourself from the struggle. So to see those brothers, man, just pull up, I mean, it was beautiful, to see what's going on in our city right now, to see how we're pushing back against the narrative that all we know how to do is create havoc and violence. That gives me hope. I left my home of Charlotte into the fire of Minneapolis, into the fire of Rockford, right? I'll be in Charlotte tomorrow, and hopefully maybe the fire has been put out a little bit. But what gives me hope is resistance. And in my eyes as a photographer and as a social justice warrior and an image activist, resistance is beautiful. Pushback is beautiful. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's mental, sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's spiritual. But what gives me hope is that like Sheriff just said, we haven't given up. We have not given up. And sometimes people want us to just lay down. We ain't laid down. So to me, resistance is beautiful.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sheriff McFadden, for your time. We appreciate you joining us this evening. And Alvin, we appreciate you being with us as well.
So
On behalf of the Q City Metro team, I want to thank David Taylor and the team at the Harvey B. Gantt Center for once again allowing me to moderate this panel. The Gantt Center continues to do excellent work in our community. As I've said before, it is truly a jewel in downtown Charlotte. It is a place where we can go to talk about the issues that truly impact us and our communities. So a big shout out to the team at the Harvey B. Gantt Center. Now we're going to turn it back to the Gantt Center, Afemi, who will give you just a little bit of information about how you can support the work that the Gantt Center continues to do in Charlotte. Thank you so much, Afemi.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for hosting tonight and for mentioning the importance of this type of work. The Gantt Center is proud to be a beacon for issues that affect our community on scales both large and small. Without your support, these types of conversations could not happen. To assist in keeping these programs alive, please consider supporting our Text to Give platform. By texting Unmasked to 345-345, you can conveniently support us in the furthering of our mission. We thank you in advance for your support, for your contributions, and for being a part of tonight's conversation. As always, please be safe and take care. Good night.